Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Chapter 8, The Last Night. Mr. Utterson was sitting by his fireside one evening after dinner, when he was surprised to receive a visit from Poole. "Mr. Utterson," said Poole, "there is something wrong. Dr. Jekyll has locked himself in his laboratory, and I'm afraid." Poole was usually a calm and quiet man, but now he was nervous and scared. He could not hide his great fear. He said, "Will you come along with me and see for yourself?" Mr. Utterson agreed. It was a wild, cold night in March, with a pale moon. The wind seemed to have swept the people off the streets. Mr. Utterson thought he had never seen this part of London so deserted. There was a strange silence in the streets. He had a feeling that something bad was going to happen. When they arrived at Dr. Jekyll's house, the street was full of wind and dust. The trees in the garden were beating themselves along the railing. Even though it was very cold, Poole was sweating. "Well, sir," he said, "here we are, and please God, let's hope there will be nothing wrong." All of Dr. Jekyll's servants were in the hall, and they were terrified. "They're all afraid," said Poole. Mr. Poole took Mr. Utterson to the cabinet. Poole knocked on the cabinet door, and a voice answered from within. "I cannot see anyone," it said. "Sir," Poole said, looking at Mr. Utterson, "was that Dr. Jekyll's voice? I have been working for him for 20 years, and I know his voice. Dr. Jekyll has been killed about 8 days ago, and the person who killed him is inside." "This is very strange, Poole, because if Dr. Jekyll has been murdered, why would the person who killed him stay? He would run away. It does not make sense," said Mr. Utterson. Poole told Mr. Utterson that all last week the mystery voice sent him for some ingredient that was not available in any pharmacy in London. Poole also said that when the person briefly came out of the laboratory, he looked nothing like Dr. Jekyll. Mr. Utterson suggested that Jekyll may have some disease that changes his voice and features, making him unrecognizable. Poole said that the person he saw inside was much smaller than Dr. Jekyll and looked exactly like Mr. Hyde. "Poole," replied the lawyer, "if you say that, it will become my duty to break in that door. I believe you. I believe poor Dr. Jekyll is dead. And I believe the murderer is still inside." They could hear someone walking inside the cabinet. "Jekyll," cried Utterson with a loud voice, "I demand to see you." He paused a moment, but there came no reply. "I gave you fair warning, and now I have no choice. I will break open the door." Mr. Utterson and Mr. Poole broke the door. Right in the middle of the room there lay the body of a man that was still alive. They drew near on tiptoe, turned it on its back, and saw the face of Mr. Hyde. He was dressed in clothes far too large for him, clothes that could have belonged to Dr. Jekyll. The man was about to die. His body was twitching. In his hand was a test tube. Mr. Utterson knew the man had committed suicide. "We have come too late," said Mr. Utterson. "Hyde is dead, but now we need to find the body of Dr. Jekyll." They looked everywhere in the laboratory, but nowhere was there any trace of Dr. Jekyll, dead or alive. "He must be buried here," said Poole. "Or he may have fled," said Utterson. Both returned to the dead body of Mr. Hyde. Near the body was a table, and on it was Dr. Jekyll's Bible. In it were written shocking blasphemies. Also, on the table was a large envelope, and written on it was the name of Mr. Utterson. Mr. Utterson opened the envelope, and it contained 3 letters. One was the will of Dr. Jekyll. One was a letter addressed to Mr. Utterson, and on one envelope said, "The confession of Dr. Henry Jekyll." Mr. Utterson opened the will of Dr. Jekyll, and it had changed. The name of Mr. Hyde had now been replaced with the name of Gabriel John Utterson. Mr. Utterson was shocked because he thought Dr. Jekyll did not like him, but this was not true. Dr. Jekyll left all his fortune to Mr. Utterson. Mr. Utterson then opened the envelope that was addressed to him. It was a brief letter written by Dr. Jekyll only a few hours ago. "Oh, Poole," cried the lawyer, "he was alive and here today, but where is Jekyll now? I feel something terrible has happened." Mr. Utterson read the letter. "Dear Mr. Utterson, when you read this letter, I shall have disappeared and may even be dead. Firstly, I want you to go home and read the letter Dr. Lanyon told me he sent you. Secondly, if you want to know more, then read my confession. Your unworthy and unhappy friend, Henry Jekyll." The third envelope was entitled "The Confession of Dr. Jekyll." Mr. Utterson put it in his pocket and said to Poole, "It is now 10 o'clock. I must go home and read these documents, but I shall be back before midnight, when we shall send for the police." Mr. Utterson knew if he read the letter what Dr. Lanyon gave him, which was in his safe, and the confession of Dr. Jekyll, the mystery would be explained.